Hi, welcome everybody. We are so glad to have you here with us today for the Design for Social Justice panel. This has been organized by SCAD's Momi Love student group for CoMotion, which is a student-led motion graphics conference that we have every year. In recent months, there has been a mainstream focus on the Black Lives Matter movement. Conversations about equity and justice have become more accessible than ever, and people everywhere are looking to find ways to contribute to the conversation. In this panel, we'll be talking to designers and animators who have pushed for positive change through their work. Panelists will provide insight on how to design for social justice, explaining how they capture diversity through their respective lenses and the lasting impact they are hoping to make through their motion design projects. My name is Chelsea Voss, and I'll be moderating today's panel. I work in industry relations in SCAD's Department of Career and Alumni Success, where I organize events like career fairs and the Catalyst Empowering Inclusion series. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are so important to me, and it's an honor to facilitate today's event. We have with us here today some very exciting guests. We have Jardley Jean-Louis, Lo Harris, Jordan Lyle, and Austin Shaw. Let's start off with some introductions before we jump into the panel. Jardley, can you please tell us more about yourself?
Sure. So as Chelsea said, I'm Jardley. My pronouns are they, them. I'm non-binary. I'm an animator, a filmmaker, and an illustrator. Currently, I am an animator on the at HBO on the interactive design team. So that typically is providing like designs and just promoting for on the social media side for our shows, films, and docs, as well as on our .com site.
Lo, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you, Jardley. Hi, my name is Lo Harris. I'm an illustrator and animator based in New York. I previously actually worked as an associate animator at NBC News, where we particularly focused on the digital shows for Snapchat, for .com, creating lots of infographics. And I actually this past January took the leap into leaving news and pursuing my own work. So I am currently a commercial illustrator. I've worked with a variety of different clients, but some even cooler causes. And that's me.
Thank you. Jordan?
Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Jordan. I am a designer in Los Angeles, currently freelancing. Within the last 2 years, I started my own brand called For the Culture Club, which is a brand of apparel focused on design, thoughtful design from a Black perspective. And I'm super happy to be on this panel.
Thank you. And Austin?
Hey, my name is Austin Shaw. I'm a designer and an educator and an author. I'm located in Washington State. And I've just been engaged over the last year is where I've really started working in this sphere of just design for social justice. So super excited, honored, humbled to be here with you all.
Yes, thank you to all of our guests. So our first question, we really want to get to know you a little more. So what is it that inspired you to design for social change?
No one has to jump in yet. I think I'm at an interesting crossroads with this question because I wouldn't necessarily wouldn't necessarily say that's the entire catalog of my design, right? Like I design for commercial clients on a day-to-day basis, but I think something that's really important to me and increasingly important to me is kind of how I show up in society, and as a reflection of me and my skill set, design is a way in which I'm able to kind of put myself in different spaces. And so I mentioned before, I have a brand called For the Culture Club, and it was a vehicle for me to be able to express, I wouldn't say necessarily say political views, but express views about identity, especially Black identity, as well as, you know, just some of the things that have been happening within my community, other communities adjacent to mine. Um, it just became a vehicle, and I landed in this space. And, you know, especially being a Black man in our industry, we're very few. So I get called up on a lot to respond to certain things, and to have opinions on certain things. So I ended up in this space. It wasn't, but I'm very happy to be here.
I can go.
Oh.
Oh, I thought it was like an echo of me saying, talking to.
Yeah.
It's all.
So, like Jordan said, like, I don't think for me it's been an intentional like route that I've taken. I think it's definitely just been that as a Black person, you know, we are still, the nuances of our stories are just not very visible in general in our society as well as in our media. And so I'm always just trying to pay more attention to my own identities, right? So gender comes up, what else? My Blackness comes up, sexuality comes up. And those are things that I think that are very imperative to continue to show. Like we do need more people within this sphere that are not just predominantly white and white stories. So that's important to me. It's also about like creating identities, like showing identities that I don't personally have, such as like I do make a point of like including disabled folks in my work, fat folks in my work, because that's important to show, for it to just mirror what actual people look like.
Yeah, I just want to say that nuance is a big thing that really resonated and rang with me as well. For me, my entrance into this social justice art space was quite accidental, as Jordan was saying. I, working in news, often had to put my identity as a Black woman aside in order to report, you know, in order to do journalistic objectivity. And during the time of George Floyd, I noticed a great incongruency, you know, in how I felt and what the reality of the situation was. And it was difficult for me to be quiet and remain professional while my entire existence was being called into question and the validity of my life was being called into question. So that was really kind of the alarm that rang for me to actually think about stepping out of news and actually using my voice in its most authentic sense. And going back to that idea of, you know, representing myself, you know, I don't claim to represent anyone but myself, but I do want to present the nuance of the Black experience that emphasizes joy, not just trauma, not just, you know, the hard parts, but joy is like a really big rhetoric in my work. And there are different aspects of my identity as a woman, as a plus size woman, that also permeates throughout my work as well. So in essence, I'm, you know, kind of representing myself, but just speaking up and using my voice authentically actually creates a space where people kind of like feel like that is social justice for them.
Yeah, for me, it's been my own unique journey is I'd say, you know, having kind of grown up in New York, pretty kind of raised by hippies, and so having kind of a progressive kind of thinking. And then when I initially went to grad schools for art education, and I had a class that was the history of American education, a real progressive professor. And I remember reading this book, and it was, you know, it's just basically that getting educated, that, you know, basically the history of education in this country is non-white cultures are either assimilated or completely destroyed, you know, and it's, you know, and that they're learning that the idea that, oh, everyone's got an equal shot, right? It is just naive, right? That there is, you know, where you're born and in the community you're born, and that it's not a level playing field, right? That I started learning about that early on. And then as an educator, as a designer and as an educator, having worked with just a lot of diverse students, but I would say for me, a couple of years ago, I've always been really politically engaged, and then a lot of the news, I think, around the immigration was a big thing, and seeing the stories about children being, torn from their parents, and I'm a parent, I have two daughters, and that hit me pretty hard, seeing that kind of stuff of just imagining, well, what if that was my daughter, and then certainly with the with the George Floyd and Sandra Bland, and going back and I think, I don't know if it was a part of it with the pandemic and having maybe more space, because I'm being kind of on lockdown, that as this news started hitting, and as I started seeing my students and my Black students posting, somebody posted, I think it was like "silence is violence" was a post I saw, and I just felt moved that all right, I've just got to start expressing myself and using some of these social media spaces, Instagram and Facebook, to just make these short. That's what got me into it, making messages that I felt like, on the one hand, was letting my Black students know, my Black friends know, hey, I stand with you, and then on the other side, being somewhat confrontational with some of the messages of just about being, anti-racism, and saying, this is where I stand. And that's what kind of got me, I'd say, somewhat of an organic, intuitive, but really emotional kind of entrance into it. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing that background. I know you've all worked for different companies, either employed by them or have them as clients. And right now, with the rise in internet activism, we're seeing a lot of companies and influencers have used social media to profit off of these important moments that we've been talking about. While many companies have made statements in favor of diversity and inclusion, it is the concrete, tangible actions that they are taking that matter the most. And not everyone is doing that. How have you seen companies that you've worked for or with taken a sincere stance during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement?
I can start. So for me, I think that the greater issue that I've noticed, like both in workplaces, but also in terms of like commercial entities, is there's like this weird, and in media, there's this weird conflation between tokenization and diversity and inclusion. And so from the company standpoint, I can't name a company that's done it because I've only ever worked at one particular company, but for me, the appropriate response would be to actually start putting resources into not just creating entry-level careers for Black and Brown folks, but actually creating ecosystems and middle management pipelines that actually make it stick and make it make sense. Because how can you expect, young, Black folks to like, who are starting their careers, to like enter these spaces with like very white managers who don't understand them and who aren't necessarily advocating for them in the ways that they can understand. The retention is just going to fall through. But I think that one brand that I've personally worked with, where there's an initiative that they started that it's still going on. And I really like it because they're just kind of doing it on their own. They had some press releases when it first went out, but they're not getting that much attention for it. They're just doing it. Is Life Waters Black Art Rising. They literally are just working with Black artists. They are still doing it, I think. And they've been putting Black artists' work on the bottles, and they've been profiling different Black artists. And they had an online sort of gallery, and I was a part of that, as well as some other prominent artists across the internet. And I think that doing things just so that it feels like a normalized thing and not like a big grand gesture is really the key for me personally, because even with regards to the influencers that I've seen, when, all of the murders were happening, in succession, I can think of a few influencers who have literally just built their followings off of drawing in memoriam portraits of these dead Black folks that go viral, you know what I mean? And they just kind of constantly reproduce these images without any sort of a regard for Black artists who have been doing the work already. It's one thing if you gain that attention, but being able to kind of feed back into that ecosystem of fellow artists and kind of say, all right, thanks for giving me attention, but I need to spotlight, I need to give flowers to, I need to let you know about, these other artists who are, actually doing this, because it's important for them to control their own narratives.
Yeah, exactly what you said. No, I think I have been kind of privy to and vocal about, seeing a few brands and companies, even some design studios, that in the heat of things, I think a lot of places feel compelled to empathize, sympathize, whichever one you want to choose. But then you kind of see who's in it for the long run a few months down when everybody starts posting Black squares and, the comments. Not saying that, the intensity of action needs to be at 100% all the time. Being realistic, like we still have lives outside of these catastrophic events that happen. But, I think down the line, when you start to see there is no actual game plan and there is no actual, there's no plan for continuing some of these stories for highlighting Black speakers, Black thought in some of these spaces, and also to that I feel like when all those things kind of wash away, you see who is actually an ally and who is intent on kind of profiting from some recognition of ally adjacency. And it's kind of sad to see, but in one way, it's also good to see who is in it for the long haul. Just a small thought that I had, yeah.
So I think with corporations in general, there's always going to be like a level of inauthenticity, right? Like I think even prior to the uprising that happened in the summer, we see it with Pride, where it's become even increasingly corporatized. So I think there's always going to be a question of how invested are they really, and how like Jordan said, how invested are they for the long term. That said, and I won't go into too many details, but at HBO, what we've done, not only during the uprising, but even currently with the anti-Asian violence that's happening, one of the things that we've been doing is like, we've been creating like open spaces for employees to just discuss and share their own experiences, for folks to understand where people are coming from. We've included speakers to also talk. Yes, during the uprising last summer, there was also like press releases that were on social platforms. Internally, we've also, I'm a permalancer there, but I've been a part of like the Black employees, like having like a call to a list of demands that they were asking, and there was like a whole like conversation about equity that is still happening. Like that is still an engaged conversation that we're having with upper management. So those are the steps that I think that I think we are all in agreement. I'm not specifically talking about HBO. I think globally we're all in agreement that this moment feels much more different than prior times. So leadership is much more willing to like listen and like realize that like, okay, yeah, we really do have a discrepancy in pay. We have a discrepancy in like the way that people are treated in at the workplace. So we really need to be like engaged, and we're not gonna just allow one conversation to happen and y'all just decide to like do whatever within like a couple months. So yeah.
I would say, from my position as an educator and freelancer, I've seen some studios. There's a small studio in New York who reached out to me who wanting to create a mentorship program, right, for underprivileged high school students, and just asking if I had advice and suggestions about how to approach that curriculum, and that I think that kind of that's a shift I've seen, and that they've put that kind of an investment in that each person in the studio would have a mentee and a mentor, and then some of the larger studios too, I've seen, starting diversity committees, right, and just having a network of a lot of alumni that I've taught who are, I just stay in touch with and hearing, and I think that from at least my perspective, seeing some positive movement in that, because I have had, over the years, a lot of, Black students who are, we're the Black designers, and
Yeah.
not, I think it was probably Jordan and, another Jordan, right? Jordan Taylor asking me that, and not having really like a clear answer, and not knowing how to answer that, other than to just try to support them as best I could and help them, nurture them in their path. So yeah, but Jordan, what are you going to say?
No, it's I have seen, and I guess I want to be clear. I have seen like a big push in certain studios, especially in motion graphics, to play a more active part in DEI, especially, and creating opportunities. I got a question last year that I got a question from a student where it was like, with now all of these opportunities that are coming up for Black students specifically in the workplace, like, how should I feel about taking these opportunities? Is it inauthentic? And I'm like, to be real, I was like, yo, this is an opportunity that you had that wasn't available to you before, and I think it would probably best suit you best to treat this opportunity as your own platform for you to create the waves that you want to create, right? Like, the space is there, the door has been opened, but what do you do with that space? And like Lo was saying, it ultimately, there's a lot more factors that play into that. When you have management that doesn't look like you and can't really cater to the things that are important to you, that's a bigger conversation. However, I don't think her asking me that question, it made me feel like, oh man, like this system really is set up for you to not even feel like you're supposed to be in these spaces. So take the space the opportunity that you're being given, and do what you can and will and want to do with it. I think that's the most important thing that I could have shared with her, or else she was just willing to like let the opportunity slide because of maybe her already feeling uncomfortable with being in that space. But I just told her to take it.
Thank you. I'm hearing some themes in everyone's responses, that companies are recognizing that diversity is not by any means enough. Being diverse does not mean a place is inclusive. And even inclusivity is not addressing a lack of equity. Jardley, like you were saying, you recognize that these conversations that they're having about equity, about pipelines, about what you mentioned with management, these are all systemic issues that they are looking to address through the lens of equity. So it's encouraging to hear you share that shift in perspective is happening with these corporations. Looking at it on a more individual level, I know many students are wondering, what are some actions that they can take through their creative endeavors that are going to support these values and promote equity? What have you done that you feel could offer tips towards these students?
I think, for me, I think that, and this is, I guess, speaking specifically to the like Black and Brown students, like, I think the onus is always placed on you all to kind of like hold all the authenticity on your back and to kind of like always question, like, am I, like, is this real? Like, should I reject this? Because what are the motivations? Like for me, I think in my process, because I grew up in Bessemer, Alabama, I, did not come from, that much of a background that would allow me to take that many risks. And yet I did. I would encourage you to take risks, take opportunities. And then the most important thing that you can do, because the companies, what they need to do, that's not your responsibility to do their work for them. You need to let them know they're not doing it right, and they need to figure out how they're going to do it. That's on them. But what you need to do then, once you start kind of getting your groove, once you find yourself in certain spaces, once you find yourself seeing a part of success, like going back and kind of like using your platform to build the platforms of others around you, and foster and nourish your ecosystem of creative peers that's always going to give back to you. You know what I mean? Like the peers that you have, like celebrating their work, sharing their work, shouting them out, and they'll remember that, and then they'll be doing the same for you, and then they'll do the same for someone else, and that just creates a more just and kind sort of creative space and a more just and kind future for creatives. So that's my piece.
That was too good.
Yeah,
I don't know, like,
I can't follow. I can't follow with that, but it's exactly what you're saying, Lo. I think with like my brand, for example, one thing that I have tried to do and continuously working on that is, kind of using my voice as what you're saying. Like I understand that in the way that I speak, sometimes I get listened to differently, or listened to in more spaces than the average person, but it then becomes my opportunity or my responsibility to see how I can reach back to where I started, or to other places that I can have an impact on, and to kind of bridge that gap between where there is no voice for some other folks. One thing that I specifically do, and it's very small in the grand scheme of things, but say I'm designing a board for a commercial, right? Or if I'm directing something and we're casting, I will always use Black talent, like always. I will always use Black people in my comps. I will always use Black examples of like companies or faces, or something like that, because to me, we hear this cliche all the time, but representation matters, but it actually does. When you can be a designer, and even for me, if I use those images, it reinforces that my position in this space is also valid, and also too that there are other folks who are looking at it that can also be inspired and see themselves in these arenas, and know that it's for them as well. So I think that's one thing that I try to do, and I think is one thing that I think when other designers, especially Black designers, enter predominantly white spaces, it is reshaping how we treat Black imagery, reshaping how we talk about Black designers and Black people in our industry, so that in one way it is reinforcing your thought in yourself, but it's also like letting other folks know, like, yeah, we're supposed to be here as well.
I'm just taking notes.
I mean, I honestly do think that Jordan and Lo have really like succinctly pointed out exactly. Like, I don't think I have much really to say other than that. Yeah.
Sure thing. So thank you, everyone, for sharing that. I'm hearing this recurring theme of authenticity and really staying true to your values. And part of that means that you want to be very selective about the projects that you are taking on. And if you are invited to do something that goes against your values, that you have to say no sometimes. Sometimes that involves uncomfortable conversations. And I know students are wondering, what do they do when they're in that situation? Have you ever been there, and what have you done?
I could answer to that some. I make a point to not really and this is something that Lo had mentioned earlier, is that like it's along the lines of focusing more on Black joy. I make a point not to take on projects that are about like consistently, like the whole theme seems to be about slavery, because I'm not looking to continue to show Black trauma. And like our stories, we have so many untapped stories that I don't think that we could ever really fully learn of the historical figures that have lived. And I would much rather like, focus on those types of stories. So I've another one I think I've also said no to was a libertarian organization. And I flat out just said to them that like our political views are not aligned. So for me, I personally just say that I'm not comfortable working on the project because of X and Y like reason. But I understand maybe some people might not feel too comfortable doing that. I don't know. I think that's the nature of how I sort of operate. So I don't really know what another alternative would be.
Yes. Retweet. Like, I mean, for me, like, it's really about kind of like really sitting true to who you are and not really minding the trends or just like the opportunity. It's not a grab bag, you know what I mean? You kind of have to operate from a mindset of abundance and not a mindset of scarcity. Like, you don't need to take every job that comes your way. I mean, I've had, someone reach out and say, do this thing for Diwali. I'm like, sir, ma'am, please, like, give that opportunity to like someone who actually participates in that holiday, who knows all the nuances, who can like bring in those like familiarities and make it authentic. I'm not, and that's kind of my bone to pick with a lot of artists who, you know what I mean, like a lot of companies who hire artists that are already kind of on the roster, like maybe they're like white guy artists, or to like constantly create work with Black figures in it. Cause it's like, no, like, I mean, it's an aesthetic, you know what I mean? But it's also like, they're like, have some authenticity with that. So for me, I'm always just like, if it don't sit right, it just don't sit right. And it's okay to say no to that. Cause trust me, there will be something that you can be working on tomorrow that will come in and it might be better.
I will also just add to that, not only just your values, but be like willing and open to trusting your intuition. Like, you will feel when something, even just within your email, talking to them, at like, not even like jumping into the project, you will feel like, okay, does this make sense for me to jump on? Something about this feels off. Like, really pay attention to that, because if you don't, pretty quickly the problems can start to arise.
Yeah, I kind of had something to like a tack-on question to something like this, because I heard something similar in the alumni panel that I was in yesterday. But sometimes, I mean, we're all speaking from a position where we are secure in our places, in our jobs. We know that we're coming from, I think we're all secure financially speaking. I can speak for myself, like. So I'm in a position where I can turn down opportunities, and I can say like, okay, this doesn't work for me. I'm gonna catch you on the next one. But for a student who, let's say, for example, like a senior that is working on an internship, or is really trying to like create, like hold a place, like secure their position at a company. It sounds kind of gross to say, but like, how should they navigate that space, and what do you think is a good way for a student to navigate a space where they're equally trying to like make themselves valuable to a company or to like an organization, but also to might not feel like they're in a position to speak up because of any repercussions? Like, what's that?
Yeah, I really like, that's such a good question. And I'm so glad that you asked that for all the people watching, because I recently graduated. So I remember like 2018 is when I graduated. And I remember being in that place where, hey, like, I'm like this like infantile designer. Like, I just want to be loved. Like, I just want to be recognized. And I think that it is like a very difficult thing to juggle. You're very vulnerable right now. Just like recognizing that you are vulnerable right now, and kind of like knowing that like in a year or two, like, you know, you will like, once you get your groove into it, you will have more agency in that situation. So it is a difficult thing. Like, still, like, if it's something that's just way out of your moral ballpark, you know what I mean? Like, it, I think it's okay for you to not do that. I understand like the urgency of wanting to kind of be like, well, I need to get this now, or, you know, like this internship that pays like $12 an hour, like, is going to change my life. Like, there, like, everything is temporary, and like talent always rises to the top. And like, just, you know, really kind of sticking true, like developing your craft, and you know, doing what you need to do, filling out your LinkedIn, like being in, you know, just like being like adamant about just making sure that all of your ducks are in a row. I just feel like the universe will attract that opportunity that does make sense, and you shouldn't have to feel pressure to take, because every job that I took as a college student that actually took advantage of me, or like right after college that actually took advantage of me, I promise I do not even remember what that job is. It had no impact on what I'm doing today.
I'll jump in. I think for me, I think it's important for the idea of like passion to alienation, right? To feeling, because it's like, if I'm feeling passionate about a project, I'm probably going to do better work. And even with students too, it's like, hey, like, I try to guide them, like, you know, this is a time, especially when you're in school, where you have a bit more self-direction on the topics you want to do. So like, choose something, take advantage of that, right? Develop your interest in that area. And then as far as morality of it, like, I haven't turned down, but I've had to ask, like, for political stuff, like, okay, which party are we talking about here? Because there's definitely going to be a line for me where I'm just like, yeah, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's important too, because it's, you know, if I'm disconnected, I mean, if there's commercial work that I'm not passionate about, I got to find something to get my passion, to make it exciting, to make sure I'm doing a good job. But if there's a moral line, I don't want to touch it, right? I'm not gonna feel good. Yeah.
Definitely. And, you know, part of having these difficult conversations concerning your morals, something that can make that easier is having people advocating for you, having mentors, whether they're in the same company as you or just people who you know in the industry who have been there, have done that, can talk to you about how they navigated it. Can you tell us more about some mentors that you've had and how they've impacted you? You know, these can be ones that you know personally, or maybe there's writers, activists, or leaders who really inspire you in the work that you do.
I think this is a very interesting question, because it is almost like the cause and the problem at the same time. Because I'd say for myself, I didn't really know many other like Black designers in motion design before I started doing this. So there was, you know, while I could have looked at, say, Austin, I took like 12 classes with Austin, and in some ways, Austin has been a mentor to me in kind of like helping me navigate my entry into the design industry. But that's only one element, you know, like it doesn't, he can't help me navigate some of the social components of me being a Black designer. Though more often than not, I'm the only Black person in a studio that I go to, and it's changing now. Thankfully, I think there's like we were talking about, there's a push for more diversity. But I didn't have an example of what that looked like and how to navigate spaces, how to have certain conversations, navigating microaggressions, you know, any of those things. And so, like what we've been talking about, the onus kind of is on that person to mentor themselves in these spaces. It's hard, but I think on the reverse side, now that, you know, folks like us, we hold certain positions. I am better equipped, having gone through some of those experiences, and having built my own kind of like guidelines of how to do these things. I am better equipped to then say, all right, cool. Well, maybe you frame this email this way, or maybe this is how you might, approach a director when you have an opinion about something that you feel like might be disregarded because you're Black or you're a woman or you're trans or you're whatever it is, like any of those things. I think in me going through some of those things now, I have the opportunity to do that, and so mentorship is a huge thing for me now, where I actively seek out Black students in the most respectful way possible, but to say like, yo, here, I think you'd be at a disadvantage if you don't have someone who looks like you to give you some more insight into the ways that you could, better navigate this industry, because everybody's learning right now. Black students are learning, students of all different ethnicities are learning how to show up, and also to like our white counterparts are also learning how to be more inclusive, how to navigate things that they just wasn't on their radar before. Mentorship is huge. It is one of the ways that I think our industry needs to change in order to like start to level that playing field.
If I'll just jump in quick to say, yeah, I think that, what you said, Jordan, too, and having, for me as an educator, and not having an answer, right? Not having an answer when my Black students asked, where are the Black motion designers, right? And not knowing how to answer, and also just being where it's like, I don't, in the areas that I can be a mentor, like I can do that, but there are areas I won't know your experience. I won't have lived that in your shoes in that way. So I can't, and that's hard, because as the educator, I want to, I've gotten way better at saying, I don't know the answer to that. I think when I first started, I felt like I had to know the answer to everything, but there are areas that not only do I not know the answer, I won't be able to have that answer, and just how to, the best, I don't know other than directing the people like you, like, well, I can connect you to, a friend and alumni and a friend. And I would say there was one, I mean, this is loosely going back to, I guess, for me as a mentor in a way, I not really a direct mentor, but I remember being kind of in my undergrad and being a bit kind of trying to figure things out. I remember my dad handed me a book. It was a James Baldwin book, Giovanni's Room. And it was just like, yeah, read the, and with the idea of not being afraid to like lay one's soul bare. And he was holding Baldwin up as an example of an artist who's laying their soul bare. And that affected me, and that was a piece of work that gave me an example, of I guess being just not being afraid to express oneself and stand up and say what you believe in.
I'd just like to piggyback off of both Jordan and Austin by saying that there is something to learn from anybody. So mentors will show up in very surprising places. So don't ever count anyone out. However, when I got out of, when I was at NBC News, and I actually asked my boss, I said, listen, Thomas, like, where are the people who look like me? Because I am one of the only Black designers in NBC News, like definitely the only Black female designer at NBC. And I just need to know what's going on. And then I ended up going, the internet is a crazy place, because then I ended up going on a headhunting spree where I was like, I'm going to find people. And that's when I started getting really like, integrated into different Instagram bubbles and communities. And I will plug this till the day I die. There is a Slack group called Blacksmiths. I feel like I've found like an oasis, and Blacksmiths houses pretty much most of the Black motion designers like in the industry, like, and it's like a very big range of like from beginners, like, students who graduated from SCAD, and to people who are literally like, they have awards. I don't know what kind of awards you could win, but they have them. So if anybody is ever like, honestly, and also for me, I am a voice note fiend. And if an artist messages me on Instagram and just like ask like a question and like give me grace, give me time and grace, I will just voice note you back and answer. Just come to me with a specific question. That's the best way to kind of get a mentor. Like, don't come in being like, I don't know, like, what's life? I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. But if you really kind of come with your research and kind of like have like a few questions and you treat it like an informational, like this, it will make it a lot easier to kind of build those connections. And I personally, like, to any students watching this, like, if you message me and you have a specific question, I will voice note you back. Just give me a few days, because I think it's so important, specifically for Black animators, specifically for Black designers, to kind of extend that. And if you are someone who's interested in joining the Blacksmiths group, Jartley and Jordan, I don't know if you all are in Blacksmiths, but if y'all are, you could message any of us and we can invite you to the group.
We're in it. No, that was great, and that, yes. So Lo already mentioned Blacksmiths. I'll before I bring in like the specific like activists as well as groups that I personally feel like I've been really taught by, I will also say that, yeah, you really can learn something from anyone and any place that you work, right? Like for me, I feel like I have learned something from even the most like toxic of leaderships and jobs that I've taken on, and it's been like learning how to speak up more for myself from a toxic environment, learning how to navigate different personalities, because the way that I tend to operate is if I'm working somewhere like a permalance position, I personally don't leave until my intuition tells me it's time to go. And so when it didn't say that it was time to go yet, I was forced to sort of try to figure out how to deal with the situation. And in the past, the way that I would deal with stuff is like, if things got a little too hot, I would leave. But because I didn't feel like it was time to go, I had to figure out how do I deal with this leadership that it wasn't so much like targeting me, but like seems to just have such a narcissistic personality that I didn't see how we could genuinely mesh. And this was a direct manager. So yes, I think you learn from leadership that's toxic. You learn from your friends. You learn from different groups. As Lo said, Blacksmiths, but I'm also personally a part of Panimation, which is a women, trans and non-binary group that it's you can ask all sorts of questions. It's not only just animation, it's illustration, it's design. We talk about things like this, like the uprising that happened. We talk about it's just like the most nuanced of questions of like, I can't even think of anything, but like, yeah, just any questions that you have as it pertains to your projects, or like how to navigate a client that there was a question that was like about who's really pushing to be on a video call instead of like actually keeping it to email, because you really want to make sure that this whole thing is documented, but they seem to care too much about being on video. The other, in terms of like activists, personally, mental health is so important to me. And I think that you cannot just be focused on like professional career. It is also about keeping in touch with yourself, keeping in touch with how other groups that you don't identify, like how what are the issues that they are facing. So I personally follow this, I can't remember exactly, I don't want to butcher her name, so I'll just say her Instagram handle is I think the fat sex therapist, and she's all about like body positivity, showing, as well as just like showing like, again, equity and social justice, not only as someone who is South Asian, but as like how it's affecting all of us, right? Stacey Ann Chin, I would also say, who's a poet, a lesbian Jamaican born poet, who I think a lot of her circumstances I greatly identify with. The whole like, I don't want to, I'm also just like somebody who like draws a line between how much I share personally, but what she tends to navigate with is like being an immigrant in New York City, and how to navigate being somebody who grew up with a motherless or not really knowing her father, and just that whole nuance and the struggles of being an immigrant in a new country, and how to just navigate your own identity. So I really do think that mental health, you should be always looking for folks that sort of speak to how to raise up your own self-worth, learn how to like be a friend to your own anxiety. That's something that I'm personally learning, and learn how to feel okay with showing up as yourself authentically in the world, because that's tough. And I try to like teach myself to do that every single day.
Thank you. Oh, Austin, did you have
Oh yeah,
something you wanted to
yeah.
add?
Just one thing was one Facebook group I joined was racism within higher education. That has been helpful for me. Just and again to just learn more and to educate myself, to find out. Yeah, again to keep my mind open and just keep learning what are some best practices and in this arena. Yeah.
Thank you. These are fantastic resources. I hope everyone has been writing these down and is going to join these and follow these. Thinking about your experiences navigating this industry, advocating for yourself, being an ally for others, what do you hope is the one main takeaway that students have from this event?
I would say take care of each other. Like everybody thinks that networking is about going up and down, but it's actually side to side. And then all your sides go up. So, so that's what I would say. I mean, it's really, you're in a very wonderful position, like being a student at this institution and being around so many creative people who could go on to do God knows what. And as you know, and all of you can continue learning together. All of you can continue having these conversations, and you are the folks who are going to be creating actively the new generation of how these creative industries will function. But you have to remember, like, it's important to network horizontally and to make sure that y'all are on the same page in order to make any real change. Unless it's just, one person can't win it all, you know what I mean? You all win it all. So that's what I would say.
I want to touch on one thing. So we've spoken a lot about the social justice aspect of things. Something that Austin and I have spoken about is kind of like the meeting place of where you're of passion and purpose. I think students specifically, the job, your task right now is to try to find a job, and your task is to solidify yourself in the workplace and start to build your career in that way. I think one thing that is super important as you find yourself in this industry and you find yourself along your career is to actively seek to find that meeting place of where passion meets purpose. I think we are here now because of that. In the beginning, we kind of fell into this position, and I know speaking for myself, where I'm right now in my career is one thing, professionally is one thing, but I think especially with my brand, and I will always use that as a focal point, is my passion as a designer, and my ability to problem solve and to think creatively and to be a photographer and to be a copywriter and to do all of these things now feels way more aligned with who I actually am, and what I can actually provide to of value to other places, because I'm identifying that my purpose is now to be maybe to be a voice in some of these spaces, is to be visible, is to use my skill set to highlight other areas of my identity, is to do all of these things. And that to me is such a wonderful place to be in. And I think it's important for students to in some way strive to do that. That to me is a perfect place to be, because it gives more validation to that you're doing the right thing, you know, that you didn't just go to art school to be a pixel pusher and, you know, make some ads for Apple or Facebook or whatever it is. Like, okay, well, how do I actually use what I'm good at and what I've been working towards and working on in my education to benefit my community, to fulfill things that are important to me. It definitely is something that I would say I hope that you will take that from me, because I can only say that it feels good to be in a space like this.
I can speak more to like the mental health aspect, because I feel like you all definitely like covered the design and as well as like networking, connecting with fellow artists. I think it's very important for you to always be constantly checking in with yourself, and I understand that, you know, like Jordan alluded to earlier, um, you might not be in the position when things get tough to just say, I'm going to take a break and come back to this like months later or weeks later. But if you are working with a you know, working at a job or working on an assignment, like just be sure to like let those higher ups know like where you are at emotionally, mentally, especially because we are constantly in a state of outside factors that are happening in the world, right? Like again, the violence that is happening right now with Asians, the uprising that had happened, but also Black people are constantly traumatized. You have things like abortion rights always being uh, shaky. So it's about like how your intersections, your identities are always going to be um, affected, right? You're not only a designer, you also have you have family, you have identities that are always just going to be constantly shown in the news as being traumatized. So do your best to find what helps you feel less stressed whenever something else arises. For myself, what I've been doing, and I've been doing this for like a couple months now, is I have a 10-minute meditation that I do. I try to do it every morning or at night, whenever I can think of like when's the best time to do it. If something like triggers my anxiety immediately, if something triggers my anxiety, I do my best to immediately go to my journal and step by step write out exactly not only the thing that happened, but how was my feelings around that situation, because then you're better able to see who you are. What are your feelings towards this situation? If you're able to have a therapist, because your friends cannot be your therapists, like you need to have people that are much more able to help you figure out why do you do the things that you do, and why do you feel the way that you feel. So I think it is very important that not only while you're leveling up in your career, that you're also making sure that you are taking care of how you feel personally, because then certain things, the way that you navigate certain situations as you grow up, will change if you're constantly checking up on yourself. It's not that time changes everything, it's that you have to put in the work.
Yeah, I mean, to echo what I've heard from everyone else, that idea that, you know, your classmates are potentially your future colleagues, so be nice to them. Right, be nice to everyone. But also that idea of it being, ideally you're going to have a fulfilling, sustainable career, right? And staying healthy, staying mentally healthy. I echo, you know, meditation's huge for me. That's been, you know, well over a decade practice for me now, as something that really helps me stay mentally healthy. And then, you know, bring back to that idea that Jordan was talking about with passion too, that, you know, it is, if I think about, I'm coming up on 2 decades working as a commercial artist now. And there was, I mean, so much in the beginning, it was just hustle, hustle, hustle to get that gig and to build my reel and to build my portfolio and my connections. And then, you know, and to arrive at whatever that initial goal was. And then when I got there, it was like, oh, my goal's different now. And that's okay, you know, and then even within, you know, for me, most recently, following that passion as a way to almost kind of reinvent, right? And that I'd say with some of this, for this topic, with some of the kind of just, I guess, what I would call like my protest gifts or the social justice work is that, I spent almost 2 decades cultivating these kind of commercial art skills that to help persuade, right? For advertising primarily, but all of a sudden they say, oh, I can take all these skills and I can subvert them and use them for something that I think is important, that means something to me. And that there's a little bit of a little Phoenix energy to that, right? Where all of a sudden I'm like reinvigorated and really wanting to just kind of get in there and keep learning. So, yeah.
It's funny that you realize like, damn, I'm actually talented in this thing, and now I can actually use my talent for something that is not commercially driven. Yeah, it's cool.
Jordan, Jardley, Austin, Lo, thank you so much for taking the time to share your answers and your experiences. This has been so valuable. I know students are super appreciative for all of your insights, and I'm also sure that they have some more questions for you. Krista, how are we feeling about that open Q&A?
It's looking good. I'll share my screen now. Okay. Can you see all the questions?
Yes, excellent. So I'm seeing with 5 votes, we have the question, how do we ensure that representation of people of color in motion design work does not become token representation informed through the lens of a white gaze? That is an excellent question. Who would like to tackle this?
I can go. I think that's a really great question. And one of the things that we've been talking about is authenticity. And I think when you have a team that's working on something and something as specific as like, something to do with identity or representation of people, it's important to have people that have actual authority in those, identities, or who have ownership of those things to be a part of the conversation. Because if you have a whole team of people talking about, women's rights, but it's all men on it, there's no way that you can have accurate representation of that, that thought or that arena. So I think it's important to have like the actual
who are, I think that might be to have the actual people who are supposed to be having those conversations and representing those thoughts to be a part of that conversation. My headphones just died, so sorry if I got cut off in the middle of it.
We hear you great, thank you. Would anyone else like to add to that one? That's okay, we can move on to the next one. This one, I know you all are gonna have some interesting answers for. What are some of your favorite projects that you've worked on with diverse teams?
I think for me, where I aligned was I try to also work with on projects or with companies that are education forward, like focused. So one of the most recent projects that I worked on was with a company called Flocabulary, and they usually merge. They merge music like hip hop videos with education, and they it's just an organization that works with schools and teachers and just to like just present a figure or a subject in a way that's fun and engaging. So they incorporate animation and like come up with like the lyrics and hire artists to come up with the lyrics and stuff. But so yeah, the video that I worked on was for this 17th century nun called Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. And she, it's just like, she's one of those people that you find out is an icon. Like, she's from Mexico. She was on different, pesos. And it's just like, it feels like one of those people that you don't know about, right? And I think that we need more of that education in general. It's to find out that she was someone who was a feminist, and during her time, she, again, as a woman, was not able to go to school. And so she tried to figure out how do I still pursue education and not end up being strapped to marriage. So she became a nun, and that's where she decided, like, that's where she just wrote a lot of poetry, a lot of plays, and tried to really focus on that. And unfortunately ended up having to do away with all her books because she wrote a manifesto that at the time was just considered too outrageous. And, I got to work with folks that I do feel like are very passionate about education. And I think that for me, that was one of my more recent favorite projects to work on. I was able to, in general, I do try to like challenge myself and work on challenge myself to like learn different effects or skills that I don't know. So I was able to do that on this project. I had a lot of time to just work on the project. I illustrated it and animated it. And it was just like a very flexible group of people to work with.
I'll jump in. This project isn't out yet, so I can't be super specific about the details of it, but I'm currently working with like a like Burrell, which is a marketing agency in Chicago that is Black owned, and it's one of the oldest Black owned agencies out there. And we're working on a project for like a large like retail chain. So working with Burrell like has been such a pleasure. I greatly enjoyed working with them because there was so much, well, like the creative, like the art directors were like a Black woman and a Black man. And like the team overall was pretty diverse, and like they were older, and I just love talking to old people. But I really enjoy working on that particular project, or it's like wrapping up now, because I felt like I was listened to in a way. Like they weren't trying to force me. It's for Juneteenth, and they weren't forcing me to buckle down into the typical Juneteenth narrative where it's like blood of our ancestors, call back to slavery, like Charlie was saying, like, all of these things. While that is like a significant aspect of that narrative, I wanted to do a more contemporary take that felt evergreen and authentic, and still fell back upon my rhetoric of joy and Black joy and just authenticity. So working in like the projects that I enjoy the most, like where I'm kind of like the principal illustrator, are ones where the team itself is very much they're not trying to force my hand and force me to do very specific things, but they're also like, they're still engaged with it. They're not like, do what you want, we'll just toss you money. Like they're also just like, I really appreciate this about your work. When I get an art director who can look at my work and will be like, hey, like, I know what will make this better. I see you do these textures and this thing and these things you've created. When they engage with your work in that level, it's chef's kiss. Like that is the hallmark of like a wonderful art director for a freelance illustrator who can defer back to your own work. So that process, I very much enjoy working with Burrell, and I would love to work with them again. So
I'll jump in with a story. This is going back, this might be like 2000. This is a long time ago. I was in grad school, and I ended up kind of working as kind of an intern and junior freelancer with the production company called the Department of Film. And they did a lot of hip hop music videos. And I kind of started as a kind of storyboard artist, hand-drawn storyboards, but I was also learning After Effects. I was really bad at it at the time, but they were, there was a video, it was, I think it was Timbaland and Magoo, I did the storyboards and for this music video called Grimy. And then the director said, hey, do you want to come in PA, like, and be on set and see the, how it all comes together? So I was like, sure. And it was, what was it? It was an 18-hour shoot. It was like 6 p.m. to like noon the next day. And they had like rented out a grocery store and then literally I was a PA. I did everything. It was like everything from being an extra in shots to like, getting people food to like everything, and then afterwards, then they said, hey, we want to help on some of the editing and doing some of the After Effects stuff. And it was just great to get to work with, team of different artists, Black directors, Black editors, and to just be in the mix there. And it was really at the beginning of my career as a commercial artist where I just kind of got exposed to all aspects of the production and post-production process.
Jordan, do you have one you'd like to share? No? Okay. All right. Well, we have time for one more question. This one is coming from Anonymous, who is wondering, what would be your advice to someone who wants to overcome the anxious feeling of coming across incorrectly when addressing these social issues if they're coming from a different community? They want to be an ally, but they want to do it correctly. What advice would you have for them?
Ask questions.
I think that I think this is for this person who's asking. I think this is your time to shine as a student, which means like you should be taking this moment to like learn from that community. Being if you have friends that are from a community that you don't identify with, first off, I think if they are comfortable sharing, then do your best to listen and understand where they're coming from. Also be educating yourself with books and different media so that you're better educated on the issues that are happening. I'm trying to figure out what else. I mean, I really do think that it's about like, there are going to be events. Like yesterday I was at a vigil for the 8 folks that were murdered. It was a Zoom event that happened, and I was able to hear from different people from the Asian community and see how it directly impacted and affected them. Right. It's same thing like at HBO where you were able to join, and it was a safe space for those folks to actually just discuss how in everyday life, how do they feel, how it's impacted them now, how they, and you're getting to learn more about their culture in general and how they navigate different issues. So I think it's best for you first to educate yourself and be more involved, even if you don't have friends that are Black or Indigenous or Latinx or Asian. Like finding those groups, be it through Instagram or any other social platform, finding those types of events so that you can be there to actually try to understand and listen.
I would say let go of your ego, and when you're in a space that clearly you haven't grown up in, you're trying to engage, like you're going to get some stuff wrong even when you have the best intentions, and you need to be okay with just being corrected and not taking that, like not getting all defensive and Sharon Osbourne and the whole thing. Because like the city girls say, like, act up, you can get snatched up, but like you're not going to get snatched up. But I would just say, let go of your ego and be comfortable with kind of being wrong, and don't let your defense mechanisms get the better of you, because it's a learning experience, and you're here, like you're trying to simultaneously stand back and make space for others while also taking in what they have to offer like they're making the choice to share that. So I would just say like, it's, be okay with being corrected, because you won't be up at night thinking about that time you said that thing and embarrass yourself, you know what I mean? Just be okay with being corrected.
Austin, did you want to add anything?
I'm just listening.
To add on this, when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion, we are all always learning, and that requires that we are putting in the work ourselves. It's an emotional burden to ask others, tell me about your experience. You take the emotional energy to let me know this. If you have friends who will do that, that is fantastic. But we need to be willing to learn this and seek out this information on our own as well. Just attending one event about this is not sufficient. There are events hosted through many organizations in your industry and through SCAD that are continuing this conversation and bringing in people and showing, no group is a monolith. Let's listen to people's experiences and their perspectives. So putting in that effort to attend these events and hear these perspectives and challenge the way you think and be okay with being wrong and thanking someone for correcting you graciously. These will all help you grow in this area and boost your capacity for understanding the experiences of others. In closing, I would also like to say thank you so much for attending this event. We're so glad to have all of our student guests and our industry guests. Jordan, Jardley, Lo, Austin, thank you so much. And for our students, we would love to see you in our upcoming CoMotion event. Until next time, everyone, stay safe.
Chelsea, can I just say one thing?
Yes.
I also want to share, like, if you want to, like, I'm definitely open for any emails or, reaching out through Instagram or whatever. To if you just have any questions, it can pertain to Blackness. It could pertain to like animation and design, and just like trying to figure out like the groups, the identities and stuff. Like, I will, if I don't know the answer and if I know about the group, I will definitely share that resource. Yeah, I can share like my handles in the chat.
Thirdly, thank you so much. Definitely reach out to our guests, connect on LinkedIn, be working on building and nourishing that network as well. We see some emails dropped in the chat. Thank you for that. All right. Well, everyone have a wonderful weekend and thank you for attending. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.